You learn strange things when you save someone's life in front of the people who never believed you could. My name is Dr. Olivia Chen. I'm 31. For the past 18 months, I've been a board-certified emergency medicine physician at San Francisco General, one of the busiest Level 1 trauma centers on the West Coast. But last September, at my sister's lakeside wedding rehearsal in Tahoe, my mother introduced me to the photographer as the girl who works at the clinic. That was 20 minutes before my 4-year-old niece stopped breathing in the shallows. I had her back before the paramedics cleared the access road. What happened when my department head walked into that resort lobby and saw me sitting among the guests? That's the part my mother still hasn't mentioned to her book club. The Thursday before the rehearsal weekend, I closed a 30-hour shift, back-to-back traumas, a pedestrian hit on Market Street, a construction fall in Soma, and a 19-year-old with a ruptured appendix that had turned septic. That last case kept me in the OR until 4 in the morning. I held pressure on a bleeder in his lower abdomen while the anesthesiologist called out dropping pressures in a voice that stayed clinical but carried an edge. He stabilized just after dawn. Discharged 9 days later with a scar he'll carry and a story he'll probably exaggerate. I peeled off my gloves in the surgical changing room. My hands smelled like antiseptic. They always do. Carmen, the charge nurse who'd been working traumas since before I started med school, stuck her head through the door. Chen, go home. You look like you went 3 rounds with a bus. I told her I had discharge notes to finish. She shook her head. Your notes can wait, your bed can't. She left a protein bar on the counter. It was the kind gesture that happens in hospitals at 5 a.m., when everyone's running on fumes and small kindnesses become currency. I ate it standing up, typing my notes with one hand, scrolling my phone with the other. A text from my sister, Maya, Tahoe this weekend, whole family coming, bring something warm, nights get cold. I stared at that text longer than I should have. At the hospital, people called me Dr. Chen, they trusted me with minutes that mattered. At home, the math worked differently. I grew up in Daly City, just south of San Francisco, close enough to see the fog roll in every afternoon. My father, David, ran an accounting firm, small operation, steady client, quiet success. My mother, Susan, taught piano lessons from our living room and had opinions about everything except uncertainty. My sister Maya was 3 years older, confident, magnetic, destined from birth to do something visible, marketing director at a tech company by 28, engaged to a venture capitalist who wore Italian suits to barbecues. Nobody ever questioned her trajectory. I was the serious one, the one who read biology textbooks during family dinners and asked too many questions about how things worked. When I got into UCSF's medical program, my mother's first response was, 8 years of school? When are you planning to have a life? I told her, this is my life, Mom. She sighed and changed the subject to Maya's promotion. The pattern started quietly and hardened slowly. My second year of medical school, I called home on a Sunday. Susan had me on speaker. I could hear the piano in the background, my father's NPR station, the clink of dishes. A neighbor stopped by. Susan said, bright as morning, oh, Olivia? She's doing some kind of medical training. I can never keep track of all the years. I said, loud enough to carry, I'm in medical school, Mom. I dissected a human heart last week. Susan laughed lightly. Well, you know what I mean. I did know what she meant. She'd already decided what fit her narrative, and the facts weren't invited to edit it. I didn't stay silent. That needs to be clear. I was never the daughter who swallowed it and smiled. First year of residency, I mailed home a framed copy of my diploma, Doctor of Medicine, University of California, San Francisco, packaged it myself, tracked the shipping. 3 weeks later, I drove down to visit. I looked for it on the walls. Not in the hallway, not in the living room, not in the den next to Maya's framed magazine feature about 30 under 30 marketing innovators. I found it in the hall closet, leaning against a box of Christmas decorations, still in bubble wrap. I pulled it out and set it on the kitchen table. Where should this go? Susan dried her hands on a towel. Oh, honey, I just haven't found the right spot yet. I pointed at the wall where Maya's awards hung in a neat grid. That wall seems to have plenty of room. She changed the subject to dinner. The second time, I invited my family to my residency completion ceremony, 45 minutes away in the city. David said he had a client meeting that week. Susan said the parking situation stressed her out. I stood in the auditorium and accepted my certificate next to colleagues whose families filled entire rows. Dr. Patel, my attending, took the photo for me. The third time, I called home the day I passed my boards. Susan picked up. Mom, I'm board certified. I'm officially an emergency medicine physician. She said, that's nice, dear. Did Maya tell you? She's planning the wedding for September, Tahoe. It's going to be beautiful. I said, carefully, Mom, I'm a doctor now, not a student, not a resident, a physician. She said, playing doctor, being a doctor, it all sounds very stressful. I'm just glad you're keeping busy. That was the last time I corrected her. Not because I surrendered. Because I redirected my effort toward people who actually needed it, the ones bleeding on my gurney at 2 a.m. Maya's rehearsal weekend invitation sat in my texts for 3 days. I almost declined. I had a shift I could have swapped, Friday overnight, 14 hours, perfect excuse. Nobody in that family would have questioned it. But on Wednesday evening, my phone rang. Auntie Liv, small voice, clear and hopeful. Emma, 4 years old and incapable of pretense. Mama says you might come to the lake. Are you coming? I learned to swim. I can hold my breath underwater for 5 whole seconds. Behind her, I could hear Maya prompting, say please, Emma. Please come. I leaned against my apartment counter. 1 chair, a stack of medical journals, a succulent on the windowsill that survived on neglect and filtered light. Emma was the only person in that family who never needed me to justify my existence. She didn't care about credentials, she just wanted me to watch her hold her breath. I'll be there, sweetheart, save me a spot by the water. I called in my shift swap. Friday night, I packed jeans, sweater, hiking boots. Then, out of habit, I grabbed my emergency kit, the small one I kept in my car, gauze, tape, a pocket airway mask, a pen light, nitrile gloves. Emergency physicians carry things. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. You see enough crises start in ordinary moments, and you stop assuming anywhere is safe. I also threw in a child's flotation vest, the kind with adjustable straps. Maya had mentioned Emma took swim lessons. Swim lessons are not the same as open water. I clipped my hospital badge to my bag without thinking. I'd come straight from a shift. Some things you carry everywhere. I pulled into the gravel lot at the Tahoe Resort just after noon on Saturday. The rehearsal venue sat on a sloped property above the lake, a cedar lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows, a stone patio, and a private beach that smelled like pine and sunscreen. California, September, 78 degrees, thin mountain air, the kind of light that makes everything look like a postcard. A portable speaker on the patio played something folksy and acoustic. Cars lined the lot, David's sedan, Susan's hatchback, a handful of luxury SUVs I didn't recognize. Maya had invited half her professional network. I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked toward the patio. Susan stood in the center of a cluster of guests, women from her piano studio, a couple I vaguely recognized from the old neighborhood. She saw me and waved, holding a glass of white wine. Oh, there she is, everyone, this is my younger daughter, she works up at the hospital. A woman in a linen blazer smiled. Oh, are you a nurse? That's wonderful. Susan didn't correct her. She turned up her smile. She's always been a helper. I set my bag down, looked the woman in the eye. I'm a physician, actually, emergency medicine. I work in the trauma department. The woman's eyebrows lifted. Oh. Susan was already steering the conversation toward the rehearsal timeline. The woman nodded politely at me, then followed Susan toward the seating chart. I stood on the patio with my bag at my feet. I'd said the words. I always said the words. The problem was never my silence. The problem was that no one in this family retained the answer once I gave it. Maya came out of the lodge carrying a clipboard like it was a scepter. She hugged me with one arm, the kind of hug that maintains distance while performing affection. Liv, you made it. Honestly wasn't sure you'd show. You're always so busy with your little job. I took a breath. Emergency medicine isn't little, Maya. She laughed, the kind of laugh that dismisses without acknowledging. Can you help me move the gift table? You look strong. I moved the gift table. I wasn't going to fight about furniture. I had bigger things to measure my anger against. On the patio, David sat in an Adirondack chair with a craft beer, holding court with 2 men I recognized as old clients. He was mid-story, something about Maya's company closing a major deal. That girl's got instincts like her old man, knows how to read a room. I walked past. David looked up. Hey, Liv. That was it. No question about work, no question about anything. I found Emma by the beach. She was crouched at the water's edge, poking a stick into the sand, watching tiny waves collapse. The second she saw me, she launched. Auntie Liv. Arms around my legs. I scooped her up. Show me this swimming you've been bragging about. She wiggled free and pointed at the water. Watch me. I looked at the beach setup. No lifeguard, No safety buoys, no flotación de visas anywhere. The water turned dark blue about 15 feet from shore. Drop off. I called to Maya across the patio. Where are the life vests for the kids? She waved dismissively. It's a private beach. Leave, not a public pool. I left the child's vest on a beach chair. Some habits save lives. More guests arrived around 1. A photographer, a wedding planner, Maya's boss and his wife. Susan greeted them like visiting dignitaries. She walked them through introductions. David got, my husband, we've been married 34 years. Maya got, our daughter, she's the bride, marketing director at a Series C startup. The fiancé got, our future son-in-law, he's in venture capital. Then Susan reached me. I was standing by the drink table, pouring lemonade for Emma. And this is Olivia. She put her hand on my shoulder, squeezed lightly. She works at the clinic, always taking care of people. She said it like it was charming, like it was enough. The photographer smiled. I did not. I'm not a clinic worker, Mom, I'm an emergency physician. Susan kept her smile in place. Oh, she's so serious. You know how kids are these days, always so busy. The photographer glanced at me, something between curiosity and discomfort. Susan was already steering her toward the ceremony timeline. I stayed by the drinks. Emma tugged my hand. Auntie Liv, why did Grandma say clinic? I looked down at her. Honest kid, honest question. Because Grandma sometimes forgets what I do, sweetheart. She frowned. But you're a doctor. I handed her the lemonade. Yeah, I am. The pattern was clear now, and I tracked it the way I'd track a patient's vitals trending down. First visit, she's doing some medical thing. Next introduction, she works at the hospital. Now, she works at the clinic. Each time, a little further from the truth. Each time, a little harder to correct without causing a scene at someone else's event. In the early afternoon, with the sun high and the air thin and bright, I sat down next to David on the patio. He was on his second beer. The clients had drifted toward the food. For a rare minute, it was just us. I tried. That's what I need you to understand. I kept trying, even when the return was 0. Dad, I had a tough case last week. 18-year-old, motorcycle accident, came in with a collapsed lung and internal bleeding. We worked on him for 6 hours. David nodded slowly, the way he nods at traffic reports. That's good, Liv, glad you could help. Then, without transition, you know Maya's company just got written up in Forbes? That girl's going places. I let a beat pass. I intubated a man in a moving ambulance last month. Dad secured his airway while the rig was doing 60 on the freeway. David looked at me, really looked, for maybe 2 seconds. Sounds intense. You be careful up there. Up there, like the hospital was a distant country he'd heard of but never planned to visit. He wasn't cruel. I need you to know that. David Chen was a man who understood the world in terms of numbers and outcomes he could measure on a spreadsheet. My world existed in chest compressions and blood gas readings, and it was as foreign to him as deep space. He loved me the way you love a language you never learned. With good intentions and no comprehension. It still hurt. Love without seeing always does. Lunch was served on long tables under a canvas canopy strung between 2 pines, grilled salmon, quinoa salad, artisan bread, and a cake that said Maya Jonathan in elegant script. Maya ran it like a production shoot, directing guests to seats, adjusting centerpieces, making sure everything was camera ready. I was cutting fruit for Emma at the kids' table when Maya leaned over my shoulder, loud enough for the adjacent table to hear. Liv, you're so good with kids, seriously, if the hospital thing doesn't work out, you'd make a great pediatric nurse. I didn't look up. The knife kept moving through the melon, clean, even. The hospital thing is working out fine, Maya. I placed a central line in a coding patient. After lunch, the adults gathered on the patio between the lodge and the beach. Jonathan brought out a cooler of craft beer, and David stood with a glass raised like he was giving a toast at a board meeting. He cleared his throat. I want to say a few words. This wedding, this whole weekend, it's about what the Chen family stands for. Hard work, real success, things you can point to and say, I built that. He lifted his glass higher. Maya, you've taken everything your mother and I taught you and turned it into something we're incredibly proud of. This wedding is proof. He raised his glass. To Maya, to Jonathan, to this family that builds real things. Susan raised her wine. And to Maya, the most driven daughter anyone could ask for. We are so blessed. Applause, murmurs of agreement. 20 people clinking glasses. Nobody looked at me. I stood at the edge of the group with a glass of water, and I might as well have been a potted plant. I waited for David to finish. Then I said it. Not loud, not soft, just clear. Aimed directly at him. I build things too, Dad, they just happen to be inside people. He heard me. I know he heard me because his jaw shifted the way it does when he's deciding whether to engage or retreat. He chose retreat. Turned back to the group and started talking about the wedding venue's architecture. I drained my water, set the glass on the table, and walked down to the beach. Emma followed me. We sat on a driftwood log, and she leaned against my arm. Auntie Liv, how come you look sad? I'm not sad, sweetheart, just thinking. About doctor stuff? Yeah, about doctor stuff. That conversation on the beach was the last quiet moment of the afternoon. One of Susan's piano students found me by the water 20 minutes later. An older woman, maybe 60, with kind eyes and a sun hat. She sat down beside me with the careful grace of someone used to sitting next to strangers. Your mother says you work at a clinic? I looked at the water, then at her. No, I'm an emergency physician, board certified, 18 months. I specialize in trauma and critical care. If someone in this city gets in a car accident or has a heart attack or gets stabbed, there's a good chance I'm the one keeping them alive at 3 in the morning. The woman's expression shifted. Your mother didn't mention any of that. She never does. The woman set down her glass. That's, Dr. Chen, that's extraordinary. Why would she? That's a question you'd have to ask her. I wasn't going to perform my mother's psychology for a stranger at my sister's rehearsal. But I also wasn't going to sit on a beach and let one more person walk away thinking I filed paperwork for a living. I just wanted one person at this event to know what I actually do. I said, now you do. The woman nodded. She excused herself, walked back toward the patio, and I watched her lean close to Susan and say something I couldn't hear. Susan's face tightened. She glanced across the beach at me, a quick, sharp look. Like someone who just realized their hand was showing. She didn't come to the beach. She just smiled wider at the next guest and refilled her wine. I turned back to the water. Somewhere behind me, the truth was circulating without my help. I went inside to use the restroom. The lodge was cool and dim after the bright afternoon, and I stood in the hallway for a moment, just breathing air that didn't smell like sunscreen and lake water. On the kitchen counter, next to a stack of rehearsal programs, there was a leather folder. The tab read, Estate Planning, S. Chen. I shouldn't have opened it. But my name was visible on the second page, sticking out from under a property document. And when you see your own name on a legal form you didn't sign, you look. It was a healthcare directive, Susan's, dated 4 months earlier, notarized. The kind of document people fill out when they start thinking about what happens if they can't speak for themselves. I read it standing up, one hand on the counter, with the same focus I bring to a patient chart. Section 1, Medical Decision Maker, Maya Chen. Section 2, Consulting Physician, Dr. Richard Yi, Internal Medicine. Section 3, Additional Notes. And here, in Susan's handwriting, neat but small, do not burden Olivia with these decisions. She has given enough of herself to that hospital, let her rest. I read it twice. Then a third time. My mother had filled out a legal document about her own potential incapacity, and she had specifically excluded her daughter. The physician, the board-certified emergency doctor, the person in this family most qualified to make medical decisions under pressure. And her reason was mercy. She thought she was protecting me. I could see it. Susan at 15, waiting for her own mother to come home from the hospital where she worked as a nurse, her mother who missed dinners, missed recitals, missed years. Her mother who died of a stroke in the hospital break room, surrounded by colleagues, alone. Susan's fear had a face. It looked like mine. But understanding where a wound comes from doesn't make it bleed less. I closed the folder, put it back exactly where I found it. Walked outside into the September sun. That document sat in my chest like a second pulse for the rest of the afternoon. I came back to the rehearsal and acted like nothing had shifted. This is what I do. In the ER, when a patient starts crashing and the intern next to you is wide-eyed with panic, you don't match their energy. You go quieter, steadier. You compartmentalize the crisis into tasks, and you execute them one at a time until the bleeding stops. I applied the same discipline to my mother's directive. Not now, not here. I watched Susan move among the guests, refilling glasses, laughing with the photographer as though the beach conversation had never happened. I watched David telling the Forbes story for the third time. I watched Maya adjusting lighting for. Then she looked away, back to her fiancé, back to the safe world of receptions and centerpieces and approving smiles. So Maya knew. Of course Maya knew. She'd always known. She told her own daughter the truth about me while standing in a family where our parents told everyone a lie. She just never found the courage to correct them. Because correcting Susan meant conflict. And Maya had spent 34 years choosing the path that kept things smooth. I looked down at Emma. You can be whatever you want, sweetheart, doctor, engineer, artist, anything, and I'll be there when you figure it out. She grinned and squirmed free to run back toward the water. I watched her go. She was the reason I kept showing up. She was also the reason what happened next tore through me the way it did. By 3 o'clock, the afternoon had settled into that loose, unattended stage where adults stop paying attention. The cooler was half empty. David dozed in his chair with his hat over his face. Susan and the piano student were deep in conversation on the patio, voices low, heads close. Maya and Jonathan had walked up the slope to take photos with the photographer. The kids, Emma and 2 cousins, maybe 6 and 8, were in the water near the shore. No adult within arm's reach. I'd moved the child's flotation vest from the beach chair to the sand, closer to the water. Emma hadn't put it on. I'd asked her twice. The second time, I knelt down, held the vest open, and said, "Arms in, sweetheart." Maya called from the slope, "She's fine, Liv, she can touch the bottom." I looked at the water past the drop-off. She could not touch the bottom there. "Maya, it drops off about 15 feet out." Maya waved dismissively, "She knows not to go out that far." I set the vest on a rock where Emma could reach it. Then I stayed on the beach, feet in the sand, eyes on the water. The sun was lower now, angling through the pines on the far shore, and the lake's surface had shifted from bright blue to something darker, harder to read. Shadows stretched across the water like reaching fingers. The sand was warm under me when I shifted my weight. The cousins were splashing each other near the shore, shrieking and laughing. Emma drifted farther out. Toward the drop-off she'd been so proud of reaching earlier. She was treading water. Then she was bobbing. Then she was reaching for the surface and missing. 10 adults within 50 feet of that water. Not one of them was watching the children. I was. I'd never stopped watching. Some instincts don't have an off switch. And mine had been sharpened on a decade of reading situations that turn lethal in the space between one breath and the next. Sound carries over water. I learned that in physics, actually, the mechanics of wave propagation across a flat surface, minimum interference, maximum reach. So when Susan's voice drifted from the patio to the beach, I heard every syllable as clearly as if she were standing next to me. She was talking to the piano student and another guest I didn't recognize. "Oh, Olivia? She does something at a clinic downtown, I think, or maybe she answers phones at the hospital. I can never quite keep track. You know how young people are, they job hop every few months." She said it lightly, casually. The way you describe a distant acquaintance whose details you keep forgetting. Not your daughter. Not the person whose diploma sat unopened in your closet for a year. This was worse than nurse. Worse than helper. This was erasure. A full, deliberate wipe. Reducing 8 years of medical training and 1,000 nights in the ER to answering phones. I turned on the beach, jaw tight, opened my mouth to. Then I saw Emma. Face down. Arms slack at her sides. 20 feet from shore, past the drop-off where the blue water turned ink black. Not splashing, not calling out. Just floating, motionless, hair fanned on the surface like seaweed. The cousins were 15 feet behind her at the shore, oblivious, still shrieking and playing. Everything else, Susan's voice, the music, the clinking of glasses, dropped out of my hearing like someone had cut the audio. There was the child. There was the water. And there was what I do. I kicked off my sandals and hit the water in 3 strides. The lake was colder than I expected, that mountain thermocline, warm on top, frigid underneath, and my legs plunged through both layers as I swam. 20 feet. I reached her in seconds. I flipped Emma face up with one arm and cradled her head against my shoulder. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were closed. Her chest was not moving. I swam back to shore with one arm pulling and one arm keeping her head above water. The sand scraped my knees when I hauled her onto the beach. I didn't feel it. I tilted her head back, opened her airway, put my ear to her mouth. No breath, no movement. I reached for the protocol that lives in my hands the way rhythm lives in a drummer's wrists. 2 rescue breaths first. That's the difference with drowning, it's a respiratory arrest, not cardiac. You lead with air, not compressions. I sealed my mouth over hers, pinched her nose, and breathed. Her small chest rose. I breathed again. Her chest rose again. No cough, no response. I shifted to compressions. One hand on her sternum, she was 4. Her ribs were thin as popsicle sticks, and I had to calculate the force to compress without fracturing. 30 pushes, hard and fast, counting in my head. Then 2 more breaths. Behind me, the world was catching up. Maya screamed. A glass shattered. Jonathan's voice, raw. Emma, Emma. Running feet on the sand, heavy, panicked, shaking the ground. I did not look up. I did not stop. I put my mouth on my niece's face and breathed for her again. 30 more compressions. My hands did not shake. They have never shaken. Not during a code blue on a gunshot victim, not during a field intubation in the back of a rig on the Bay Bridge. And not now, with Emma's heartbeat under my palm, faint, but fighting. On the third cycle, Emma coughed. Lake water surged up and out of her, a thin greenish stream that splashed across the sand. Then another cough, deeper, Veta. And her body convulsed under my hands. I rolled her onto her side, recovery position. She retched twice, coughed again, and then. The sound I'd been waiting for. A ragged, gasping inhale. Breathing. Crying. Alive. I held her on her side and checked her pulse at the brachial artery, inside her upper arm, the pediatric checkpoint. Heart rate elevated, maybe 130, but steady and strong. Her oxygen levels would need monitoring, but her color was already coming back. Blue lips fading to pink. I looked up for the first time. Maya was on her knees in the sand, white as the rehearsal cake. Her hands were reaching for her daughter but trembling too badly to hold anything. Jonathan stood behind her, both hands pressed over his mouth, frozen. David had stopped halfway down the slope, beer can still in his hand, as though his brain had stalled mid-step and forgotten to tell his body. Susan stood at the top of the patio with both hands covering her face. I lifted Emma and placed her gently in Maya's arms. Keep her on her side. If she vomits again, let it come out, don't lay her on her back. Maya clutched her daughter. Liv, how? Someone needs to call 911, tell them you have a pediatric drowning, patient responsive, needs emergency assessment, tell them we'll meet the ambulance at the main road. I was not asking. I was directing. The same voice I use at 2 in the morning when a trauma rolls through the bay doors and every second is a negotiation with death. The beach went silent. For the first time in my life, my family did exactly what I told them. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. 2 paramedics jogged down the beach access with a pediatric kit and a portable monitor. The lead medic, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and calm hands, knelt beside Emma and ran through vitals. Pulse ox 93 and climbing, respiratory rate 20, no signs of aspiration. She shone a penlight in Emma's eyes, reactive, equal. She turned to me. Who initiated CPR? I did, I said. 2 rescue breaths first, then 30 compressions. She responded on the third cycle. Submersion was under 90 seconds, total CPR approximately 2 minutes. She studied me the way medical people study each other, reading competence in vocabulary. You're medical. Emergency physician, San Francisco General. She nodded once, the nod of recognition, not surprise. Your field save gave this kid the best possible outcome, textbook vent first protocol, we'll transport for observation, but based on what I'm seeing, you bought her a full recovery. Maya stood beside the stretcher, holding Emma's hand. Jonathan stood behind Maya, arms wrapped around himself. David had finally made it to the beach, Birkin abandoned somewhere on the slope. They all heard every word. Susan, standing at the back of the group, spoke first. Well, anyone would have known to do that. The paramedic didn't turn around, she was strapping Emma to the stretcher, adjusting the child-sized oxygen mask. But her voice carried. Ma'am, 90% of bystanders freeze during a pediatric drowning. What she did isn't anyone. That's trained response. The silence after that sentence lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Emma, sleepy under the oxygen mask, reached for me. Auntie Liv, you're coming, right? Right behind you, sweetheart. They transported Emma to UCSF Medical Center, the closest pediatric-capable facility. I drove behind the ambulance in my own car, still in beach clothes, damp jeans, sand in my hair. No scrubs, no white coat, no stethoscope around my neck. My hospital badge was buried in my bag under a wet towel. Maya rode in the ambulance with Emma. Jonathan drove with David and Susan. The piano student came too, for support, she said. But I think she wanted to see how the rest of this played out. We gathered in the pediatric ER waiting room. The same kind of waiting room I walked past 100 times a week on my way to the trauma bay. The same chairs I'd seen families collapse into after I told them their person was going to be okay. Or that I'd done everything I could. Now I sat in one of those chairs. And the fluorescent lights buzzed the same. And the linoleum smelled the same. And I was on the wrong side of the doors. Emma was taken to pediatric observation. Maya paced. Jonathan gripped his phone like it was the only solid thing in the room. David sat rigid, staring straight ahead like a man dropped into a country where he didn't speak the language. A nurse walked past the waiting area, clipboard in hand. She glanced through the glass partition, slowed, and looked again. I recognized her, Yin, from night shift. She recognized me. Dr. Chen. She stopped walking. Is that you? I didn't see you on the schedule. Are you on shift? I shook my head slightly, mouthed, not now. She held my eyes for a beat, nodded, moved on. Maya stared at me from across the room. Did she just call you, are you? That's what people at my workplace call me, Maya. Waiting room's compress time. 5 minutes feels like 30. Susan filled the silence the way she fills every silence, with narrative. She was talking to the piano student, loud enough for the room to absorb. Constructing a version of the afternoon that would fit inside her world. It happened so fast. 1 minute she was swimming, the next, honestly, I thank God that Maya got to her when she did. I was sitting 4 chairs away. I got to her, Mom, not Maya. She adjusted without missing a beat. Well, yes, you were in the water too, you helped, but the ambulance people said anyone could have. The paramedics said the opposite. You were standing right there when she said it. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her purse. I'm just saying, let's not make this about who did what. The important thing is Emma's okay. I leaned forward. You're right, the important thing is Emma is okay, so maybe stop telling people a version of today where I wasn't the reason for that. The waiting room had that particular quality of silence that happens when everyone is listening and nobody wants to admit it. Jonathan studied his phone. David cleared his throat. The piano student looked at the floor. Susan smoothed her skirt, one long, deliberate stroke. And turned her face toward the wall. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She just stopped talking. Which, for Susan, was the nearest thing to surrender I'd ever witnessed. I sat back in my chair. She could rewrite a decade of my career. She'd proven that with every piano recital and neighborhood introduction. But she could not rewrite something 15 people watched happen 2 hours ago. And the distance between those two facts was closing fast. Maya found me in the hallway 5 minutes later. Her face was wrecked. The kind of face you see on parents in the ER when the adrenaline is wearing off and the magnitude of what almost happened is settling in like concrete. She stood in front of me and opened her mouth twice before sound came out. Leave, if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't, but I was there. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I should have listened about the vest. I should have been watching the water. I was taking photos while my daughter was. Yes, you should have been watching. She flinched. I didn't soften it. Some truths need their full weight. And I should have, for years, Liv, I should have said something, to Mom and Dad, about what you do, about who you are. I told Emma, but I never. Why didn't you? She looked at me with our mother's eyes and our mother's habit of avoidance. Because it was easier, because as long as they were focused on building me up, I didn't have to fight them about tearing you down. I let that sit. She'd said it plainly. And there was a kind of courage in the admission, even if it was years overdue. I don't need you to be sorry, Maya, I need you to stop being comfortable with their version of me. She nodded, slowly. The way a person nods when they know the bill has come due and there's no one else to pay it. I walked back into the waiting room and sat down. The fluorescent lights hummed. A vending machine in the corner cycled with a low mechanical groan. Susan was staring at a pamphlet about pediatric safety like it contained the meaning of life. Then the double doors at the end of the corridor swung open. Dr. Amara Okoye, silver-haired, 5'11", white coat pressed to a crease you could cut glass on, strode through with a resident half-jogging at her elbow. She was mid-sentence about a discharge plan, already scanning the waiting room the way she scanned every room. Quick, comprehensive, diagnostic. Her eyes swept past the vending machine, past David, past Susan, past Maya standing at the window, and landed on me. She stopped. The resident, still talking, bumped into her shoulder. Okoye didn't notice. She tilted her head the way she does in the trauma bay when something doesn't track. When the vitals say one thing and the patient says another. Then she walked straight across the waiting room, white coat swinging, stethoscope tapping against her chest with each stride. And stopped in front of my chair. Dr. Chen. She said it the way she always says it. Professional, matter of fact. The way you'd say good morning to someone you see every day. But in this room, in this context, surrounded by these people. Those 2 words hit the air like a flare over dark water. Susan's head snapped up from the pamphlet. David's hand tightened on the armrest. Jonathan went still. Maya turned from the window. Okoye, oblivious to the detonation she'd just triggered, continued. Why are you sitting out here? If your family's back there, I can walk you through myself. Let me check with the care team. I'm here with family, I said. My niece was the drowning case brought in about an hour ago. Okoye's expression shifted. Your niece? She paused. The field CPR on that case was textbook. Wait. She looked at me. That was you. I nodded. Of course it was, she said. Okoye turned to the room. She was not performing. She was not making a speech. She was simply filling in context the way doctors do when they realize someone's chart is missing a page. You must be incredibly proud, she said, addressing the cluster of family members like colleagues at a briefing. Dr. Chen is one of the strongest emergency physicians on our team. The field save she performed today, ventilation-first CPR on a pediatric drowning victim in open water without equipment, that's a skill set most ER docs would struggle with outside hospital walls. She said it like she was reading vitals off a monitor. Factual, obvious. Not praise. Inventory. She ran our trauma bay solo last month during the 101 pileup. 11 patients, 0 losses. I submitted her name for the State Emergency Medicine Award last quarter. She let that land. Then she added, almost as an afterthought. She's also being considered for Associate Director of Emergency Services next fiscal year, but you probably already know all that. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls of that waiting room like barometric pressure before a storm. The piano student looked at Susan. Susan looked at the linoleum. David looked at his hands. Jonathan's lips were parted, frozen. Maya had closed her eyes. Okoye sensed the atmospheric shift. She glanced between me and my family, her brow furrowing. Did I interrupt something? No, I said. You said exactly what needed to be said. Okoye, still puzzled, tried once more. I'm sorry, I assumed you all knew this. What did you think she did here? Susan could not answer. I answered for her, quietly, without heat. She thinks I work at a clinic. Okoye looked at me. Then at Susan. Then back at me. A single expression crossed her face. Something between disbelief and the particular sorrow that comes from suddenly understanding a colleague's private weight. She didn't comment. She didn't need to. She touched my arm once, briefly. I'll check on your niece personally, she's in good hands. Then she walked back through the double doors. And the waiting room belonged to us. Susan stood up. Her composure was fracturing from the inside out. You could see it in the way her hands shook, the way her voice climbed half an octave. Now wait. I have always told people she worked at the hospital, always. I've always been supportive. I don't understand why she's making this sound like. The piano student, quiet as a hymn. Susan, you told me she worked at a clinic 2 hours ago on that patio. I said no such thing. And you told me she answered phones, added the other guest from the beach, who had ridden along and was now seated in the far corner, clutching her purse. Susan spun toward me. Her eyes were wet. You don't understand. I was trying to. Your grandmother, She stopped. The sentence stalled at the edge of something she'd spent 50 years avoiding. I waited. I gave her the silence a physician gives a patient before delivering a diagnosis. Not rushing, not retreating. Just steady. She couldn't finish it. So I did. I know about Grandma Lynn, Mom. I know you were 15. I know she was a nurse who worked nights and missed everything. I know she died in that hospital, and you were waiting at home. I know you're terrified that what happened to her is happening to me. Susan sat down, hard. Like her legs had made the decision without her. David reached for Susan's hand. She let him take it. His face had the collapsed quality of a man who just realized he'd been standing in the wrong room for a very long time. But Mom, I continued, and my voice did not rise. Instead, it went quieter. Instead of telling me you were afraid, you told everyone I worked at a clinic. Instead of asking me about my work, you erased it. You didn't protect me from medicine. You protected yourself from having to admit I chose it, and I'm good at it. She didn't speak. Her free hand pressed flat against her thigh, fingers splayed, the way people brace themselves when the ground shifts. David cleared his throat. Liv, I'm. He looked at Susan, at me, at the floor. I should have come to your ceremonies. I told myself you didn't need us there. I was wrong. I nodded. It was not enough. But it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. And I wasn't going to punish honesty with silence. You don't owe me an apology right now, I said. You owe me the truth. Next time someone asks what your daughter does, you tell them, not your version, mine. Maya, from the corner, I'll make sure of it. I looked at Susan. I love you, Mom, But I will not let you teach Emma that what I do doesn't count. She already knows what I am. She's the only person in this family who's been proud of it out loud. Susan flinched. That landed. They'd all known. Every single one of them. They just chose a story that was easier to tell. Okoye came back 20 minutes later with an update. Emma's chest x-ray was clear. Lung sounds normal bilaterally. Oxygen saturation at 97%. No signs of aspiration pneumonia. They'd keep her overnight for observation. Standard protocol for pediatric submersion. But she expected a full recovery. She's asking for her aunt, Okoye added, looking at me with a small smile. We filed into the pediatric room. Emma was propped up on pillows, an oxygen cannula draped across her cheeks, looking smaller than usual against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes found me before anyone else. Auntie Liv? I sat on the edge of her bed. Hey, sweetheart, she yawned, the enormous, jaw-cracking yawn of a 4-year-old whose body was demanding sleep after the most frightening hour of her young life. The doctor said somebody did really good CPR on me. Her eyes were drooping. Was it you? Yeah, sweetheart, it was me. She smiled, already half asleep. I knew it, because you're a doctor. I pressed my lips to her forehead. Her skin was warm. Her heartbeat was steady under the thin hospital gown. Go to sleep, Emma. Her eyes closed. I sat there for another minute, feeling her pulse through the mattress, counting it out of habit. When I finally looked up, Susan was standing in the doorway. No audience, no piano students, no narrative to manage. Just a mother watching a daughter she'd never figured out how to see. We didn't speak. Some things need more time than a waiting room can give. The following week played out in fragments. Maya called me on Tuesday. She'd gone to a frame shop in the city and had 2 pieces mounted, my medical school diploma and my board certification. She hung them in her office at the startup, on the wall behind her desk, next to her own awards. I should have done this years ago, she said. Yes, I said, you should have. There was silence on the line. Not the uncomfortable silence of avoidance. The honest silence of a sister sitting with the weight of what she'd allowed. David left me a voicemail on Wednesday evening. 3 minutes long, mostly dead air. I could hear him breathing, starting sentences and stopping them, the creak of his chair. At the very end, his voice cracked through. I'm sorry I never came to your ceremonies, Liv. I told myself you didn't need your old man there. I was wrong about that. He hung up. It was the most words he'd given me in a year. Jonathan texted on Thursday. Thank you for saving Emma. I don't have better words than that. Just, thank you. I texted back, take care of her. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Susan. Nothing. No call, no text, no voicemail. No appearance at my apartment door with tea and an apology. I did not expect one. My mother's ability to reshape reality around her own comfort was her oldest and most practiced skill. One waiting room was not going to retire it. But the piano student told me something the following Sunday. At the next lesson, someone asked Susan about her daughters. And Susan said, my older daughter works in marketing at a tech company, and my younger daughter is an emergency physician at San Francisco General. No qualifier. No diminishment. No, she helps out. For the first time in 8 years, Susan spoke the truth to the people whose opinions she valued most. She didn't say it to me. She said it to her students, where reputation is built and maintained by repetition. And maybe that means more than any phone call could. I didn't win that day because my department head walked into the waiting room. I won years before that. The first night I held a scalpel under fluorescent light and knew, with every nerve in my hand, that this was exactly where I belonged. The lake just made the rest of the world catch up. My family might take longer. But I stopped waiting for them to see me. I already knew who I was. The stethoscope always did. That's my story. One rehearsal weekend, one near drowning, and one word from a colleague that unwound 8 years of erasure in 5 seconds flat. If this story reminded you that your worth is not decided by the people who refuse to see it, hold on to that. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And I'll see you in the next one.